The galaxy of Warhammer 40,000 is loud with legends. It roars with names carved into history by fire and blood, heroes who thunder across battlefields, champions who demand to be witnessed, warlords who turn conquest into spectacle. Yet beneath all that noise, beneath the banners and the chants and the endless hymns to victory, there exists another kind of warrior. One who does not want to be remembered. One who survives by erasing every trace of his existence. This is the world of the Raven Guard, and it is not a glorious one. To understand the Raven Guard, you must first abandon the idea that all Space Marines are forged to inspire awe. Some are made to terrify. Some are made to dominate. And some, like the sons of Corvus Corax, are made to disappear. Their victories leave no parades, no statues, no songs. When the Raven Guard succeed, there is only silence, followed by the slow realization that an enemy's stronghold has gone dark, a rebellion has collapsed overnight, or a war has ended without anyone truly understanding how. This silence is not accidental. It is doctrine, it is identity, and it is a curse. From the moment a Raven Guard warrior takes his first breath as a Space Marine, he is taught a truth that other legions never fully accept: visibility is vulnerability. To be seen is to be targeted. To be known is to be hunted. And so the Raven Guard learn to strip themselves of excess emotion, excess words, excess presence. They learn to move like rumors and kill like inevitabilities. Over time, this way of war reshapes not just how they fight, but who they are. The tragedy begins here, long before any battlefield is reached. Where other Space Marines are encouraged to embody the ideal of the Imperium, noble, unbreakable, larger than life, the Raven Guard are shaped into something narrower and darker. They are not told to shine as examples of humanity's dominance. They are told to survive long enough to ensure someone else never will. In this philosophy, there is no room for pride. Pride draws attention. Attention gets you killed. This mindset seeps inward. Raven Guard do not simply hide from the enemy, they hide from themselves. Their thoughts become disciplined, controlled, clipped of unnecessary emotion. Joy is dangerous. Anger is noisy. Fear is unacceptable. What remains is a cold, focused resolve that feels less like heroism and more like endurance. And endurance is not the same as living. The Imperium celebrates its angels of death, but it does not linger on what that existence costs. For the Raven Guard, the cost is isolation so complete that even brotherhood becomes distant. They fight alongside other Space Marines, yet they never fully belong among them. Their methods are misunderstood. Their victories are invisible. Their losses pass unmarked. Over centuries, this creates something far more corrosive than battlefield trauma: the quiet certainty that their suffering will never matter to anyone except themselves. This sense of being unseen is not just cultural. It is written into their very flesh. The gene seed of the Raven Guard is notoriously unstable, prone to mutation and degradation. Pale skin, coal black eyes, and jet dark hair become more pronounced with each generation, stripping them of any resemblance to ordinary humanity. Over time, many Raven Guard feel themselves drifting further away, not just from the people they protect, but from the idea of humanity itself. They are defenders of mankind who increasingly no longer look like men. And still, they fight. This is the twisted paradox at the heart of the Raven Guard's existence. They are loyal beyond question, yet profoundly disconnected from the Imperium they serve. They are precision-made instruments in an empire that values spectacle. They are shadows in a civilization obsessed with light. Every campaign reinforces this contradiction, carving it deeper into their identity until it becomes impossible to separate duty from self-erasure. Yet none of this emerged by accident. The Raven Guard did not choose this path on their own. They inherited it, from a father who understood captivity before he ever understood command, from a Primarch who learned that freedom is often bought with invisibility. To speak of the Raven Guard without speaking of Corvus Corax is to speak only half the truth. Their silence mirrors his. Their restraint echoes his. Their self-loathing, buried beneath layers of discipline and duty, is a reflection of his own. The Legion's life is twisted because it was born twisted, shaped by desperation, betrayal, and a belief that justice must be swift, unseen, and absolute. And so the question returns, heavier now than when it was first asked. What does it mean to live your entire existence as a shadow, knowing that if you ever step fully into the light, everything you are will be destroyed? For the Raven Guard, this is not a philosophical exercise. It is the defining condition of their lives. They do not seek answers. They endure the question, again and again, across 10,000 years of war. And in that endurance, something fragile and human slowly erodes, until all that remains is the shadow itself, moving endlessly across a galaxy that will never truly see it. Before the Raven Guard were a legion of shadows, before silence became their language and disappearance their creed, there was a child who learned a brutal lesson long before he ever knew his name. This is not a story that begins with conquest or glory. It begins underground, in darkness, among broken bodies and stolen air. And if you stay with me until the end of this video, you'll uncover the single moment that permanently twisted not just a Primarch's soul, but doomed an entire legion to a life of isolation and quiet suffering. Corvus Corax did not grow up believing in destiny. Destiny, to him, was just another lie told by those who already held power. When he first opened his eyes, it was not to a palace or a cheering crowd, but to the cold, merciless reality of Lysias, a moon ruled by overseers, machines, and systematic cruelty. This was a world where men were numbered instead of named, where lives were spent like fuel, and where survival depended on learning how not to be noticed. Here, Corax learned his first and most important truth: strength alone is never enough. The strong are seen, and the seen are controlled. As a child slave, Corax watched rebellion after rebellion rise and fall, each crushed not because it lacked courage but because it was predictable. Loud resistance invited swift annihilation. Hope, when made visible, became a target. And so Corax adapted. He learned to listen instead of speak, to observe instead of charge, to strike only when the blow would end everything in a single, irreversible moment. Even before he understood what he was, Corax was already becoming what he would one day lead. When the Emperor finally found him, it was not a reunion filled with warmth. It was an extraction. Corax was taken from the shadows and shown a galaxy aflame with war, told that he was a Primarch, crafted to command, to conquer, to bring entire star systems to heel. But something in Corax recoiled at that idea. He had not spent his life breaking chains just to forge new ones for others. This inner conflict would define everything that followed. Unlike his brothers, Corax did not revel in domination. He saw oppression instantly, recognized its patterns, and despised it with a cold, burning intensity. Where other Primarchs sought victory through overwhelming force, Corax sought something cleaner. Faster. Final. His wars were not meant to be spectacles, they were meant to end suffering before it could scream. And when he was given a legion, he reshaped it in his own image. The Raven Guard were not trained to stand tall and proud. They were trained to fade. Corax drilled into them the same lesson Lysias had taught him: the enemy cannot destroy what it cannot find. He rewarded patience over aggression, restraint over fury, intelligence over brute strength. Slowly, deliberately, he stripped war of its noise until all that remained was efficiency and silence. But there was a cost to this philosophy, one Corax understood better than anyone. Every step deeper into the shadows pulled his sons further away from humanity. Every lesson in invisibility demanded a sacrifice of identity. They became masters of survival, yes, but also prisoners of their own restraint. Corax saw this happening and hated himself for it. Yet he could not stop. To change course would mean betraying everything he had learned in chains. It would mean admitting that the shadows he trusted might one day consume those who followed him. This is the unspoken tragedy at the heart of the Raven Guard. They were not born twisted by chance. They were shaped by a Primarch who believed, perhaps correctly, that mercy, when seen, never survives. And so he gave his legion the only gift he believed would keep them alive, the ability to vanish. What Corax never fully realized was that in teaching his sons how to disappear from the enemy, he was also teaching them how to disappear from themselves. And that lesson would haunt the Raven Guard long after their father was gone. The transformation of the Raven Guard from warriors into shadows did not happen overnight. It was not enforced through punishment or fear, but through something far more effective, belief. Under Corvus Corax, the Legion came to believe that every sound they made, every symbol they carried, every moment they drew attention to themselves was a potential death sentence. Other legions trained to endure pain, to break walls, to stand unyielding in the face of annihilation. The Raven Guard trained to avoid the moment of annihilation altogether. From the very beginning, their way of war was different. Recruits were not praised for aggression or raw strength, but for patience. They were tested not on how hard they could strike, but on how long they could wait. To hesitate was not cowardice, it was wisdom. To withdraw was not failure, it was calculation. Over time, this inverted every instinct that most Space Marines were taught to embrace. This training reshaped their minds as thoroughly as their bodies. Raven Guard warriors learned to speak less, not because words were forbidden, but because words were unnecessary. Orders were brief. Communication was precise. Silence became a shared language, a form of trust. When a Raven Guard Marine moved into position, he did so knowing that his brothers would already be where they needed to be, unseen, unheard, and lethal. This created a bond unlike that of any other legion, one built not on camaraderie or ritual, but on absolute confidence in one another's restraint. Yet that bond came at a terrible price. As individuality was stripped away in favor of efficiency, many Raven Guard found it increasingly difficult to define who they were outside of war. There were no great feasts, no thunderous celebrations, no roaring declarations of victory. Success was measured by absence, by enemy commanders who never returned, by rebellions that collapsed without explanation, by worlds that fell silent overnight. The Raven Guard did not bask in triumph. They moved on, already fading from memory. To the Imperium, this made them useful. To themselves, it made them hollow. Even among other Space Marines, the Raven Guard felt like outsiders. Their methods were unsettling, their demeanor distant. Where other legions sought honor through open battle, the Raven Guard seemed to deny the very concept of honor as spectacle. This led to quiet resentment. Whispers followed them, accusations of cowardice, of dishonor, of fighting without courage. The Raven Guard never answered these claims. To defend oneself was to draw attention. And attention was the enemy. But the truth was far more disturbing than any insult. The Raven Guard were not avoiding danger. They were absorbing it internally. Every mission demanded absolute control, over fear, over anger, over grief. When a brother fell, there was no outcry. No public mourning. The loss was recorded, acknowledged, and buried beneath layers of discipline. Over time, this created a legion that appeared unbreakable from the outside, yet internally carried an immense, unexpressed weight. This emotional compression became part of their identity. They did not process trauma the way others did. They endured it in silence. Each Raven Guard Marine carried the memory of countless unseen deaths, kills made in darkness, enemies who never knew they were hunted, civilians saved who would never know who intervened. There was no release for these memories. No recognition. No absolution. Only the quiet understanding that tomorrow, they would do it again. And always, above it all, loomed the unspoken expectation set by their Primarch. Corax did not demand devotion through praise or spectacle. He demanded it through example. He watched everything. He spoke little. His disappointment was far more terrifying than his anger. To fail in stealth was not just a tactical error, it was a betrayal of everything the Legion stood for. And so the Raven Guard pushed themselves further into the shadows, refining their methods, suppressing their instincts, becoming ever more detached from the idea of glory. They were not heroes. They were solutions. By the height of the Great Crusade, the Raven Guard had become a legion perfectly adapted to a specific kind of war. One that ended threats before they could grow, one that left no symbols behind, one that ensured the Imperium's enemies died confused and alone. Yet this perfection masked a growing fragility. A legion built on restraint can endure almost anything, but when it finally breaks, it breaks inward. And soon, the galaxy would give the Raven Guard a wound so deep that no amount of silence would ever be able to hide it. As the Great Crusade thundered across the galaxy, the Raven Guard found themselves fighting wars they would never be praised for, alongside brothers who barely understood them. The Imperium expanded through fire and proclamation, through banners raised high and victories shouted to the stars. Compliance was often loud, overwhelming, and theatrical. To many legions, war was not just necessity, it was proof of dominance. For the Raven Guard, this obsession with visibility felt dangerously foolish. They fought anyway. They always did. Where other legions shattered enemy lines in open confrontation, the Raven Guard were deployed to places already deemed impossible, fortress worlds that resisted every frontal assault, regimes that survived purges through secrecy, rebellions rooted too deeply to be torn out by brute force. And again, the Raven Guard succeeded. Commanders vanished. Supply lines collapsed. Entire leadership structures died in a single night. By the time Imperial forces advanced, resistance had already withered into confusion and fear. Yet when the histories were written, their names rarely appeared. This invisibility created a subtle but poisonous tension between the Raven Guard and their fellow legions. Victories achieved through spectacle were celebrated. Victories achieved through absence were questioned. Some called their methods dishonorable. Others mocked them as cowards who refused to meet the enemy face to face. The Raven Guard heard these words and said nothing. Silence was not submission, it was survival. But silence also meant that resentment was never challenged, only allowed to fester. Corvus Corax understood this better than anyone. He watched his brothers, Primarchs born of war and destiny, shape entire cultures in their own image. Some ruled through fear, some through reverence, some through absolute destruction. Corax, however, saw the cost beneath their triumphs. He saw liberated worlds quietly become prisons under new banners. He saw compliance achieved at the price of freedom. And each time, something tightened inside him. The Imperium spoke of unity, but Corax saw conformity enforced at gunpoint. This created a fracture between Corax and the wider Imperium that never fully healed. He obeyed the Emperor. He fulfilled his role, but he questioned the method. His legion did not conquer for glory, they intervened to end suffering quickly, to remove tyrants rather than replace them with new ones. This made Corax effective, but it also made him dangerous. A Primarch who thinks too deeply about justice is not easily controlled. Among his brothers, Corax became increasingly isolated. He was not loud enough for some, not ruthless enough for others. His preference for surgical strikes over planetary devastation was seen as inefficient by those who valued speed through annihilation. And yet, when a campaign stalled, when an enemy refused to break, when victory demanded subtlety rather than force, the Raven Guard were called in. Always as a last resort. Always to clean up what brute strength could not solve. They were indispensable. And still, they did not belong. This contradiction weighed heavily on the Legion. Raven Guard warriors began to feel like tools rather than brothers in arms. Deployed, expended, withdrawn. Rarely acknowledged. Rarely understood. Over time, many stopped expecting recognition altogether. They told themselves it did not matter. That results were enough. That survival was victory. But war has a way of exposing every lie a warrior tells himself. As the Great Crusade neared its peak, tensions within the Imperium grew sharper. Old rivalries hardened. Ideological differences deepened. Trust, never abundant, became fragile. The Raven Guard felt this shift before most. They were trained to notice patterns, to sense instability, to recognize the moment before collapse. And what they sensed was not victory, but something far worse approaching from the shadows. They did not know where the blow would fall. Only that when it did, it would be catastrophic. And when that moment finally arrived, on a world that would become synonymous with betrayal, the Raven Guard would learn, in the most brutal way possible, what it truly meant to be unseen. The massacre at Istvaan V did not begin with gunfire. It began with trust. Orders were issued. Battle lines were drawn. Loyalist legions were told they would strike together, shoulder to shoulder, against traitors who had already revealed themselves. For once, the Raven Guard were not deployed as ghosts or assassins. They were asked to stand openly, to commit fully, to fight in the light alongside their brothers. It was everything they had been trained to avoid, and yet they obeyed. They always did. As the Raven Guard made planetfall, there was a quiet unease that settled over the Legion. Not fear, not doubt, something subtler. A wrongness in the air. Corax felt it immediately. The patterns did not align. The enemy positions were too exposed. The resistance too predictable. For a legion that lived by reading the unseen, the battlefield felt staged, almost artificial. But even Corax could not imagine the scale of the lie unfolding around them. When the trap was sprung, it was absolute. The second wave came down not as allies, but as executioners. Fire rained from the skies. Loyalist formations were torn apart in moments. Vox channels dissolved into screams and static. The Raven Guard, positioned at the forefront, were hit first, and hardest. Their carefully planned advances became killing zones. Their escape routes vanished under bombardment. In a matter of minutes, a legion designed for precision warfare was drowning in chaos. For the Raven Guard, this was more than a military disaster. It was a violation of everything they were. They had trained to avoid attrition, to prevent mass casualties, to never be pinned down in open slaughter. And yet here they were, forced into a meat grinder they had never prepared for. Their stealth meant nothing against orbital fire. Their patience meant nothing against betrayal. Their numbers stabilized, but they never truly grew. Recruitment returned to its traditional pace, slow and careful, as Corax abandoned all shortcuts. Every new aspirant was scrutinized, tested, and shaped with an almost ruthless caution. The Legion could no longer afford mistakes. There would be no second chance at salvation, no forbidden knowledge to undo failure. What remained of the Raven Guard accepted this with grim clarity. They would move forward, but only by carrying the weight of everything they had lost. The culture of silence deepened. Where once restraint had been tactical, it now became emotional necessity. Raven Guard warriors learned to bury grief beneath layers of discipline so thick that even they struggled to access it. Conversations became shorter. Bonds became quieter. Brotherhood still existed, but it was expressed through unspoken understanding rather than shared words. They did not reminisce about fallen brothers. To remember too vividly was to invite collapse. Physically, the Legion continued to change. The degradation of their gene seed accelerated after the heresy. Skin grew paler with each generation. Eyes darkened until they appeared almost void black. Many Raven Guard developed an aversion to light, both literal and symbolic. Bright environments felt intrusive. Loud company felt unbearable. Over time, the Legion began to look less like humanity's champions and more like something that had evolved away from humanity altogether. And still, they served. In the restructured Imperium that followed the heresy, the Raven Guard found themselves increasingly marginalized. The Codex Astartes broke the legions into chapters, further fragmenting an already shattered identity. The Raven Guard complied without protest. Fragmentation was familiar. Isolation was expected. If anything, it felt honest. Corax, however, could not remain. Haunted by his failures and the memory of what he had unleashed, Corax made a choice that would define the Legion's future more than any battle. He left, not in anger, not in rebellion, but in penance. He vowed to hunt the traitors alone, to carry the burden of guilt away from his sons. Some say he entered the warp. Others claim he became something no longer entirely Primarch. What mattered was not where he went, but that he never returned. The Raven Guard were left without their father. There was no final guidance, no closing words, no reassurance that their suffering had meaning. They continued on out of loyalty, not hope. Each chapter carried fragments of Corax's teachings, but none could replace his presence. Over time, his absence became another shadow layered onto their existence, one more silence they learned to endure. This was the legion that emerged into the long, grinding darkness of the 41st millennium. Not broken enough to fall, not whole enough to heal, just quiet enough to survive. To live as a Raven Guard in the long darkness of the 41st millennium is to exist in a state of perpetual withdrawal. Not retreat, withdrawal. A deliberate step back from the world, from noise, from emotional exposure. Where other Space Marines defined themselves through ritual, heraldry, and shared myth, the Raven Guard defined themselves through absence. Their lives are structured around preparation, execution, and disappearance, repeated endlessly until time itself begins to blur. Daily existence within the chapter is quiet to the point of unease. Raven Guard warriors speak only when necessary. Training is conducted with minimal instruction, because expectation has replaced explanation. Each Marine is trusted to know his role without being told. This level of autonomy appears empowering from the outside, but in truth it isolates each warrior within his own thoughts. There is no space for confession, no outlet for doubt. Weakness is not punished, but it is silently absorbed, buried beneath layers of control. Emotion, when it surfaces, is treated like a liability. Grief is compartmentalized. Anger is sharpened into focus. Fear is acknowledged only long enough to be eliminated. Over centuries, this creates warriors who are extraordinarily effective, but dangerously inward-facing. Many Raven Guards struggle to articulate who they are beyond their function. Ask them why they fight, and you will not hear speeches of honor or destiny. You will hear statements of fact. Orders must be followed. Threats must be removed. Humanity must endure, even if they themselves feel increasingly distant from it. Interactions with other Imperial forces are professional, restrained, and brief. Guardsmen often describe Raven Guard deployments as unsettling, not because of brutality, but because of how suddenly they appear and vanish. One moment, enemy leadership is alive. The next, it is gone. The Raven Guard leave behind no reassurance, no explanation. They do not linger to be thanked. To them, gratitude is irrelevant. Survival is the only acceptable outcome. Yet this constant detachment comes at a cost few outsiders ever see. Raven Guard suffer from profound survivor's guilt, carried across generations. Every Marine knows that his existence is the result of countless others who did not survive Istvaan, the heresy, or the centuries of attritional warfare that followed. This knowledge breeds a quiet fatalism. They do not expect long lives. They do not plan for futures beyond the next campaign. To do so would feel indulgent, almost disrespectful to the dead. Their bonds, though real, are subdued. Brotherhood exists not through shared joy, but through shared endurance. A glance exchanged before a mission. A silent acknowledgement after extraction. Trust without conversation. In many ways, this makes the Raven Guard closer than most, but also lonelier. There is no release valve for the pressure that builds inside them. No moment where the mask can fully come off. And the mask never truly comes off. As centuries pass, the Raven Guard become increasingly specialized in wars no one else wants to fight. Infiltration into hopeless sieges. Assassinations deep behind enemy lines. Wars that must be won quietly, without inspiring rebellion or panic. The Imperium uses them precisely because they are expendable in ways other chapters are not. If a Raven Guard strike force never returns, there will be no public outcry. No shattered morale. Just another silent adjustment in the endless calculus of war. They know this, and they accept it. This is perhaps the most unsettling truth of all. The Raven Guard do not resent their fate. They do not rebel against their role. They internalize it, refine it, and become exactly what the Imperium needs them to be, living shadows deployed to solve problems that must never be seen. In doing so, they slowly erase themselves, piece by piece, until the line between duty and self-annihilation becomes impossible to distinguish. They endure not because they believe in victory. They endure because stopping would force them to confront everything they have buried. And that is a darkness even the Raven Guard are not prepared to face. By the 41st millennium, the Raven Guard exist as a legion of shadows in every sense. They are no longer defined by numbers or titles, nor by the glory of conquest or the applause of the Imperium. They are defined by endurance, by a quiet, relentless commitment to a duty that consumes everything else. Every operation they undertake is executed with surgical precision, every strike measured, every withdrawal deliberate. They are everywhere and nowhere, leaving only whispers behind, a ghostly reminder that the Imperium is maintained not only by light, but by the darkness it rarely acknowledges. The Imperium, as vast and bureaucratic as it is, needs them. It needs a force that can achieve the impossible without fanfare. Yet it does not care to understand them. Other chapters boast of heroics, of battles survived and enemies crushed. Codices and records praise their deeds. But the Raven Guard's victories are often invisible. Worlds liberated, tyrants removed, uprisings quelled, all vanish into history with no recognition, no honor, no celebration. For the Legion, this is not injustice, it is reality. Silence is both their weapon and their punishment. Over centuries, this reality has shaped them irrevocably. The Raven Guard have become ghosts in human flesh, their appearance reflecting the shadows in which they operate. Pale skin, dark eyes, and an aura of detachment mark them as different, as other, as something apart from ordinary humanity. Their minds are disciplined to the point of emotional repression. They do not seek friendship or understanding outside their own ranks, and even within their chapter, connection is sparse, measured, and understated. They are a community defined by trust in action rather than trust in words. And yet, despite this isolation, the Raven Guard endure. They fight because they must, not because they are celebrated. They endure because stopping would mean surrendering to despair, confronting the cumulative weight of 1,000 losses that have no memorial. Each mission, each campaign, each strike reinforces the quiet truth. The Raven Guard will continue to exist in service, even as the galaxy forgets they ever did. The tragedy of the Legion is subtle, almost invisible. They are not remembered because they do not allow themselves to be. They are not celebrated because their victories are meant to be silent. They are not whole because the wounds of betrayal, Istvaan, and the forbidden experiments with gene craft remain ever present, etched into the Legion's collective psyche. And yet, they survive, an enduring, relentless shadow cast over a galaxy that never fully acknowledges its presence. In the end, the Raven Guard are defined not by who sees them, but by what they accomplish in the darkness. They fight without glory, exist without recognition, and endure without complaint. And in that endurance lies a quiet, devastating power, the power to survive when all others fail, to act when no one is watching, and to carry forward a legacy written not in light, but in shadow. Their story is not one of triumph. It is not one of honor. It is one of survival, of fidelity, of sacrifice without acknowledgement. And perhaps, in a galaxy that glorifies spectacle and pride, that is the cruelest and most heroic fate of all. The Raven Guard are not tragic because of their failures. They are tragic because they endure. Across 10,000 years of war, their losses have been unimaginable. Betrayal at Istvaan V shattered them physically and emotionally. Forbidden experiments under Corax's desperate hand left scars that generations of warriors would carry silently. And yet, they continue to fight, to survive, and to serve an Imperium that rarely notices them. This is the defining paradox of the Raven Guard. Their strength lies in invisibility, but invisibility is also their eternal burden. They endure not for recognition, nor for glory, nor even for love. They endure because their training and their nature leave no alternative. Every mission undertaken is another reminder of what they have lost, and every strike executed perfectly in silence is a reaffirmation of their survival. They are bound together not by celebration, but by the shared weight of endurance, by the memory of those who did not survive, and by the unspoken understanding that the shadows are all they have left. Even within the broader Imperium, their presence is more utility than honor. Other chapters may be remembered in lore, chronicled in records, and hailed as heroes. The Raven Guard are referenced in passing, often as a tool, rarely as individuals. Their victories leave no monuments. Their losses leave no mourning. Yet, the Imperium continues to call on them again and again. Because when there is a war that cannot be won through brute force or spectacle, the Raven Guard remain. They are the solution to problems no one else can solve, ghosts moving unseen through the machinery of a galaxy perpetually at war. And this is where their tragedy and their power intersect. A legion built to vanish, surviving countless near extinctions, carrying centuries of trauma and guilt, becomes something other than a typical Space Marine force. They are a mirror held up to the Imperium itself, a reflection of loyalty and sacrifice without expectation of acknowledgement, a measure of what it truly means to serve without reward. To be the perfect instrument of war is not to be a hero, it is to be indispensable, unseen, and ultimately alone. The Raven Guard do not fight for legacy. They fight because the act of fighting, however invisible, is the only way to honor the dead and ensure that humanity endures. Every Marine in the Legion carries this truth into battle, shaping their actions, controlling their emotions, and mastering their fear. Silence is their discipline, shadow is their shield, survival is their only monument. And in the end, the greatest truth of all emerges: the Raven Guard will never be fully understood by the galaxy, nor even fully understood by themselves. They are defined by absence, bound by loss, and sustained by the unrelenting will to endure. Yet despite the weight of this existence, they continue to move forward, strike without fanfare, and vanish once more into the darkness, living proof that sometimes the most powerful warriors are the ones you never see, and that survival itself, in a universe of endless war, is both a curse and a triumph. By the current age of the 41st millennium, the Raven Guard are a legion defined not by their victories, nor by their numbers, nor even by the glory of their campaigns, but by the shadows they inhabit. Every Marine understands that the Imperium neither celebrates nor mourns them. Recognition is irrelevant. History records them in footnotes, at best, and often ignores them entirely. Yet they continue to fight, because the very act of fighting is their reason for existence. Their lives are a testament to endurance without acknowledgement, sacrifice without reward, and loyalty without applause. This enduring silence shapes every facet of Raven Guard life. Their training remains as strict and as isolating as it has ever been. New recruits are indoctrinated not just into combat techniques, but into a philosophy of disappearance. They learn that every step must be measured, every action calculated, and every word filtered. Even among their own brothers, interaction is minimal, precise, and functional. Emotional bonds exist, but they are compressed, expressed through subtle gestures, shared timing, and mutual understanding rather than conversation or camaraderie. Silence has become both shield and language, and their survival depends on it. Despite their isolation, the Raven Guard are indispensable. The Imperium continues to call upon them to perform the missions no one else can. Infiltration behind enemy lines, surgical strikes in hopeless sieges, the eradication of threats before they can even materialize, these are the tasks that fall to the Raven Guard. And they complete them without complaint, without fanfare, and without seeking recognition. Their victories vanish as quietly as they arrive, leaving behind only whispered rumors and a galaxy that remains unaware of the forces keeping it alive. Yet this life comes at a cost. Decades, centuries, and millennia of constant vigilance have eroded the boundaries between duty and self. Every Marine carries the weight of losses both immediate and generational. Memories of Istvaan V, of forbidden experiments, of brothers who never returned, they are ever present, woven into the fabric of the Legion. Survivors' guilt and quiet despair have become almost tangible companions, shaping every decision, every strike, every calculated withdrawal. Even Corax's absence looms over the Legion like a shadow within a shadow, a reminder that guidance and protection are luxuries the Raven Guard cannot claim. And still, they endure. Because to stop is unthinkable. To pause is to acknowledge the enormity of all that has been lost. To abandon duty is to betray the memory of those who fell, the Primarch who molded them, and the countless civilians and worlds who rely on their silence to survive. Endurance is their identity. Stealth is their creed. Sacrifice is their only legacy. In the quiet of space, in the chaos of war, and in the fleeting moments before enemy command collapses under unseen assault, the Raven Guard move like shadows incarnate. They fight without expectation, survive without acknowledgement, and endure without complaint. And this endurance, silent, invisible, absolute, is perhaps the greatest power of all. Because in a galaxy that worshipped spectacle, the Raven Guard proved that the most important battles are not fought to be seen, but to ensure that the unseen continue to exist. The Raven Guard's existence is a paradox. They are among the most disciplined, lethal, and effective warriors in the Imperium, yet their efforts are rarely noticed, seldom praised, and almost never understood. Every mission they undertake is executed with a precision and restraint that few other chapters could achieve. Where others leave devastation in plain sight, the Raven Guard leave only silence. They strike swiftly, vanish, and allow history to assume the outcome was chance or divine providence rather than the calculated skill of men forged in shadows. Yet this invisibility comes with a psychological cost that no training, no doctrine, and no survival instinct can fully erase. Raven Guard warriors live in an almost perpetual state of internalized tension. Every sound, every movement, every glance could mean detection, failure, or death. This constant vigilance becomes second nature, but it also deepens the distance between them and the rest of humanity. They operate in a world of isolation, where even brotherhood is tempered by necessity. Trust is measured by competence and restraint, not affection or camaraderie. Emotional expression is a luxury they cannot afford. Over generations, the Legion has absorbed this philosophy so completely that silence is no longer merely tactical, it has become existential. To speak unnecessarily is to risk exposure. To linger is to invite danger. To feel too deeply is to risk distraction. These lessons, taught by Corax and reinforced by centuries of survival, have created warriors who are as much defined by what they do not do as by what they do. The Raven Guard exist in negative space, defined by absence, by restraint, and by shadows. Even within the Imperium, their unique nature isolates them. Other chapters may be chronicled in tales of valor, adorned with heraldry, and remembered for generations. The Raven Guard are remembered only as a tool, an instrument to achieve outcomes that others cannot. They are dispatched to fight wars that would break lesser chapters. They eliminate threats that are too subtle, too well hidden, or too politically inconvenient to confront openly. And when the task is complete, they vanish without acknowledgement, leaving only the silent evidence of their efficiency. It is this combination of invisibility, relentless duty, and psychological burden that defines the Raven Guard. They are a legion of endurance, carrying the weight of loss, betrayal, and unacknowledged service across millennia. Every Marine bears the legacy of Istvaan V, the guilt of forbidden experiments, and the knowledge that even their Primarch's guidance is gone. They fight not for glory, not for honor, and not for recognition, but because they cannot do otherwise. To stop fighting would be to confront the full magnitude of their tragedy, and the Raven Guard endure because endurance is all they have left. And in their endurance lies both their curse and their power.